Welcome to the Devin Nunes podcast, breaking through the political noise, separating fact from fiction. From the San Joaquin Valley, the breadbasket of the solar system. Here is your host, Devin Nunes.
Welcome back to the Devin Nunes podcast and simulcasting on video on Rumble. Always advise you to stay off of YouTube. I want to thank all of you for continuing to tune in to help me spread the message to get out what I believe the American people need to know on a daily basis, monthly basis, and especially as we lead into this coming election. Every week, my listening audience continues to increase, and I want to thank all of you for that so that we can continue to spread the word. This week, I have Mike Doran on. He has extensive experience in the foreign policy arena, and I'm going to spend this week on foreign policy. Specifically, we're going to look at today, we're going to look at really closely the Trump foreign policy, and then on Friday, we'll get into China because Mike is an expert on China. He's a fellow at the Hudson Institute, spent some considerable time in the second George W. Bush part of the administration at the National Security Council, focusing on the Middle East. So Mike, welcome to my podcast. And we keep it nice and simple here and conversational. I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on.
No, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So you do great work. I read everything that you write. And I think you're one of the best thinkers that we have in our nation, and it's because of your vast experience, not only the Defense Department, state, and the National Security Council, but also the work that you do on a daily basis at the Hudson Institute. What I wanted to kind of get into here with you, I was hoping you could maybe explain for our audience, is because there seems to be a lot of questions about what exactly is Trump foreign policy. What does America first mean? And let's walk the listener through what significant steps has the Trump administration done over his first 4 years in office of things that you didn't think we could get done. And then let's talk about what the first 4 years would look like. So first, Mike, let's start out with what's your assessment of the first 4 years?
I think that they've been amazing when you calculate in that the entire foreign policy establishment was opposed to what the president was trying to do. And so, given the fact that he's had to swim upstream the whole time, I think it's been quite remarkable how he shifted the entire debate. And beginning with the question of China. I mean, you have to credit him with having put the China question front and center and make everyone realize the significant threat that China represents to us and start reorienting the whole foreign policy toward the question of containing China. I think that's already, you have to give him extremely high marks for that alone. And that is the single most important thing.
So when you're right, and I think he came across the China issue, being a builder, being in construction, being in real estate. He knows this to his core, traveling around the Rust Belt and seeing the empty manufacturing buildings. So he came across it, I think, just naturally that, hey, why are we shipping all these jobs to Asia? This makes no sense. Why can't Americans be doing these jobs? And then upon entering into the White House, I think he quickly learned that, not only has China been a problem, globally and economically, everything that they got away with during the Obama administration and their advancement into the South China Sea, I think he saw the real danger, not just an economic danger, but also a military danger.
Yeah, I focused very closely during the campaign on everything he was saying about the Middle East. And I was really struck by during the 2016 campaign, the disciplined messaging that he was putting out. I was working at first for the Scott Walker campaign, and I watched him just make all of the other candidates look very, very, very small. Because what he was saying really was on a gut level, it was on an instinct level, and he was just saying over and over, your elite doesn't have your best interests in mind. They're getting involved in all kinds of, going down all kinds of rabbit holes in the Middle East that we don't need to go down. They're not conserving our power. They're not looking after our interests. And this is the amazing thing about Trump. I mean, he's not an intellectual. I don't think he's really studying long policy briefs and so on. But like you say, he just saw transformations in the country and understood the sort of big tectonic plates that were moving things in that direction. I think that's his strength. It's also his weakness. He's not a. You remember they explained when they described when Jimmy Carter was in power. Jimmy Carter would know every little detail of every policy. That's not Trump, right? Trump is just kind of pushing with 2 or 3 big issues, pushing in a certain direction, trying to move the whole system in that way. He'll be accused sometimes of not having all the details, but I don't think the president has to have all of them.
Well, and also those that have had the most details have made the biggest blunders. And sometimes
Right.
it's, being able to see the forest through the trees. And look, even myself, someone who's paid close attention to foreign policy my whole career, especially serving on the intelligence committee and all the debacle that we dealt with in the Middle East. And Trump looks at it real simply, which was was that a success or was it a failure? And I think I think we all largely agree that what we did in Iraq has not worked out the way we thought that it would work out. And he has that added advantage of, despite what people may think, he called it right from the beginning. He did not think we should go into Iraq in the beginning. And so, he has every right to say, hey, I got it right. All of you geniuses got it wrong. And so, but with all that said, what he's done in the Middle East, Mike, I think is critical because, he did the unthinkable, which was to move the embassy to Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Nobody thought that he would do that. And now he's managed to broker a peace deal with one of the major Arab leaders in the Gulf. And so walk our listeners through that and why that is so significant that nobody else could seem to get done before him.
That is actually, it's amazing because he has developed a new paradigm, and all by going against what all of the experts said. And I mean uniformly in Washington, in Europe, everywhere, they said you have to make a deal with the Palestinians before you can get a deal between Israel and any of the Arab states. And they went about it the exact opposite way. And they proved that you could do it. And it goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago, because he's got the big tectonic questions correct. And the second thing I would think after China that he's gotten right is Iran. And he has shown that all of the Obama arguments about Iran, that it was either the nuclear deal or war, that there was no way that the United States could reimpose sanctions without isolating itself in the world, and it would fail, and so the sanctions policy would fail. All that was proved entirely wrong. And what he did by containing Iran and reimposing the sanctions is he won the trust of both of the Israelis and of the Gulf Arab partners. And that's the single most important thing that's going on here in that deal between the UAE and the Israelis, is that both of them recognize that they share, together with the Saudis as well, who are kind of the silent partner behind the scenes of this thing, they recognize that the Gulf states and Israel share more interests in common than they realize. And they also realize that the United States is stepping back somewhat from the region. That was true under Obama. It's also true under Trump, but Trump has done it in a more sensible way because he's making our allies realize that he's still working closely with them. And in that context, they saw it as in their interest to kind of band together, send the same picture to Washington. And it's a new paradigm. It is phenomenally important, and it's fantastic to see. It's good for Israel, good for the United States.
And let's just go into the, watching, this. Everybody knows recently there was a flight that went from UAE, United Arab Emirates, into Israel and flew over Saudi Arabia.
Over Saudi airspace,
yeah. 99% of our listeners probably say, what's the big deal about an air flight, Mike? So what's so big about this flight?
Well, these countries they've never recognized Israel, and they've never had relations. They've never allowed Israel to use their airspace. And there's been, in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, there's always been a tendency for the Arab countries that didn't border Israel to be kind of more militant against Israel than the ones who bordered it, because the ones who bordered it had to worry about they had to worry about managing relations with Israel. But if you're one or two countries away, it's not that you're going to be necessarily more militant, but there's no reason to bother to engage with Israel in any way, because you pay a domestic political price at home for doing so, and you don't really get that much in return. But now the Gulf states, the UAE has recognized that Israel is a significant military power. It's a cyber superpower. It's a technological innovator and an innovator of new weaponry. And that there's a kind of economic marriage going on here as well as the strategic marriage. I think we're going to see a lot of investment from the UAE into Israel, and it's going to be very interesting. It's going to transform the nature of the Middle East.
No, I couldn't agree more. And so when you hear this term America First, what is that? How would you describe that to the American people?
You know,
as it relates to foreign policy.
I have a very different view of it than a lot of my colleagues in the foreign policy world, especially coming out of the Bush administration. I think that the reason for that, I think, is because I grew up in the Midwest. And so I have never found the America First rhetoric of Donald Trump to be as grating on my ears as it seems to be to my colleagues. Because all I hear is self-confident nationalism, of a very healthy sort. Just like you don't want a friend who's always doubting himself, and you don't want a father who's going and spending his money on some other family other than your family. You want to marshal your resources intelligently. You want to look after your own interests intelligently. It doesn't mean you're not altruistic and not helping others, but you start with a sense of what's in my best interest, and you move from there. I don't understand any of the more nefarious interpretations of the idea.
Well, I do. It's because anything Trump and anything Republican they don't like, and I always have to remind everyone that they did, despite what one may think out there, that this is a new phenomenon of the press and all the intellectuals hating Republicans. I have to remind them that they also hated Romney, and they said that Romney had it all wrong. They also hated McCain. They said McCain was going to destroy everything, going to bomb everything, and that he was a total nutcase, essentially is what the Democrat Party and the media turned McCain into. And then, of course, because of the George W. Bush administration, that he was a warmonger, and that was the beginning of MoveOn.org, which has now developed into all of these other left-wing super PAC funded groups that have now led us into riots and mobs under this supposed peaceful protest. So I always have to remind people, every Republican, and they ought to be smart enough to know this, that we run for president has been labeled the same as Trump has been labeled. It's just that Trump did the impossible. He actually beat Hillary Clinton. And now he's been successful on the foreign policy stage, more so, I believe, like what you said, in just a matter of short time, because he was able to see the forest through the trees, is how I would describe it. And one of the last things we need to talk about, just to make sure people understand, Mike, is NATO. So that was stood up after World War II. We have bases that are all over Europe, costing us a considerable amount of money. It's been, actually something that I focused on in my career. I couldn't figure out, why do we have these huge, massive investments with so many bases spread across Europe, and then when our NATO allies, refuse to actually pay to support our troops and our people being there. They're supposed to put in 2%. Most of them were, somewhere around 1% or below. And then and I'm sure you've been to these locations too, you get to a lot of these bases and the locals would say, no, you can't train here, you can't do this, you can't do that. So then it's even, not only are we spending a fortune in these locations, but these are American taxpayer dollars. They're not letting our troops even be trained properly what we're there for is to help defend our European allies. So walk us through kind of your thoughts about how he's dealt with NATO and the changes that he's made there.
That's your friend Victor Davis Hanson in his book on the case for Trump, he called Trump chemotherapy. And I think that Trump is chemotherapy for NATO. When I was in the Defense Department, I saw Secretary of Defense Gates talk to a high-level delegation of Europeans and tell them in very calm terms that they're not meeting this 2% threshold was becoming a political issue. He said, until now, you've just heard us hector you. But I'm telling you, you've got to get this right, because this is going to become a domestic political issue in the United States. And when that happens, you're going to regret it. And he told them that in, very calm, judicious terms. And it didn't mean anything. They all nodded their heads. And so, here comes Trump, and that's 8 years after Obama. So they've had ample warning about this. When I was in the White House, we did a review. This is after 9/11. We did a review of our Iran personnel in the State Department. And we found out that there were more people in the State Department working on Norway than there were working on Iran, and that was under Secretary of State Rice. So she started to change it, but I think that there really needs to be a serious look at the amount of resources that we're sinking into Europe, diplomatic and military, compared to other places like Southeast Asia, the Western Pacific, the Middle East, places where our interests are really being directly challenged in the most aggressive way, and where there aren't actors on the ground who can look after those interests. I mean, these are wealthy countries in Europe.
Well, and the final kind of the point on this, Mike, that I'll get you to comment on is that finally Donald Trump realized our allies that are actually on the front line, who actually came out of communism, like Poland and Romania, after all these years of having these huge sunk investments in Germany and Italy, relics of World War II, where they're not paying their fair share, other countries that actually were paying their fair share, that are actually on the front lines. And the irony of this, of Obama and Biden, talking, everything Russia is so bad. Well, why the hell didn't they do anything to help out our Polish allies and our Romanian allies? It's Trump who has actually delivered on this, and he's saying, he's now said, look, we're gonna move our troops to places like Poland, like Romania, where number one, the real threat is, and number two, where they're actually willing to be accommodating for our troops and our soldiers and they're actually, the Poles, I think, have actually built a military base. I know the Romanians have offered another military base, where the Germans, we're constantly, if we want to, drive a car from one side of a base to another, it's a whole ordeal that we have to get, the State Department involved to get approval. And Trump's just said, look, enough is enough. Where's the threat? Oh, it's Russia. Okay, why aren't we in Poland protecting these people? I mean, it's rather amazing that these simple facts aren't getting out to the American public. And I'll let you just comment on it. And
there's another simple fact too. If you talk to people in the military about the Iraq War, they'll tell you something about the Poles, and that's that they fight, which is not true of a lot of our other allies, who may send contingents of troops, but they keep them on the base behind the wire. With all kinds of caveats about their participation in operations, but that's not true of the Poles, because for the reason that you're describing, they feel the hot breath of the Russians on the back of their neck, and they recognize that having an active fighting force is absolutely key to their own defense, and those are exactly the kinds of nations that we need to be aligning with. And by the way, that's another great thing I think that Donald Trump has done, is that he clearly has a notion in his mind of bilateral relations with other self-confident nations who are able to look after themselves and their allies. This gets caricatured by the foreign policy elite as Trump likes authoritarian leaders. No, he likes self-confident friends who will look after their own interests.
And just a little bit of common sense, too. I mean, I can't tell you how proud I was. Finally, we had a president of the United States who stood up and said, wait a second, Germany, your former president is on the board of a Russian gas company. You're moving gas into Germany, while at the same time, we're footing the bill to protect you. You're causing problems for our troops, half the time. And yet, here you have, you're solely bought and paid for by the Russians. And, what do you have to answer for that? Why do you continue to buy gas from Russia? Why do you have former, high-level officials that are on the boards and consult for these Russian companies? And I was so proud of finally we had a president of the United States who called it exactly right, was not afraid to stand up to the Germans, wasn't afraid to upset them. And and now you've seen, and that's why I think it's important to get another 4 years, because we need to make that transition away from, it's not like we need to give up on Germany completely, but they need to know we're not just going to foot the bill, and we're not going to sit there and let you, get the cheap gas from Russia that's essentially funneling money into their military operations.
That 4 more years is so important. Nobody knows that better than you, because you know how much was taken away from him because of all this Russiagate nonsense. And one of the effects of all that Russiagate nonsense on our allies was that it led them to believe, like the Democrats, that Trump was just a fluke. They don't understand the sort of deep cultural background that is supporting Trump. That Trump didn't just come out of nowhere, and he's going to be a flash in the pan, and that's the end of it. So to really get the full effect of the transformation, we need the four more years, so that everyone understands that the United States shifted. It isn't just that this strange guy Donald Trump appeared out of nowhere. This is really based on something deep, something structural, something cultural.
Well, Mike, thank you. We're going to get to China on Friday. I want to thank you for being on the show. You're on Parler. What are you at, Mike Doran?
You know what? I think it's at Duranimated. Well, I think it's Duranimated. So I don't know I'm still used to my Twitter. I know Twitter's now noxious for you.
We don't talk about Twitter sewer on here, Mike. Okay. No, thank you. But we'll put your Parler handle on the screen. But thank you so much for being here. This is Devin Nunes. We'll catch you on Friday.
Thanks for listening to the Devin Nunes podcast. We invite you to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And remember, you can download this podcast on iTunes or at devinnunes.com.
Storm clouds been gathering so long, I don't know.
The darkness around us leaves no easy road.
We started wondering if every road dead ends our dreams. Wind whips the dust up and rain's pouring down.
Good people struggling in every hometown.
We've started wondering if we even matter at all. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. Now it's not our first trial by fire like this.
It's nothing hard working family can fix.
We've got the power to save it all here in our hands. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. As we, the people, free and strong, fight through the dark night toward the dawn. Freedom marches on. Now the hard road is waiting, but we're not afraid.
That's why they call her the home of the brave.
With a prayer and a purpose, we're already half the way there. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith.
Paid for by Devin Nunes Campaign Committee.